All right, so my book that I read was called All Eyes, a memoir of deafness by Bainey Cyrus. And so my summary of the book is that Bainey Cyrus tells her life growing up in both the hearing and the deaf world. She was born in 1961 with an invisible disability. Her mom had contracted a case of rubella during pregnancy and she didn't know it. So when Bainey reached 2 years old, using no spoken words, her parents took her to have her hearing tested. At this time, she was diagnosed with severe to profound hearing loss due to nerve damage. When she turned 5, her parents sent her several hundred miles away to the Clark School for the Deaf. This was a traumatic experience for Bainey as she lacked any type of communication and felt like she was being deserted by her parents. Nonetheless, she grew to adapt to the school and she made friends and had the support of a specific teacher, Miss Miller. Since the school consisted mostly of in-state students, Bainey was one of the few who could not go home on the weekends. Thus, she formed friendships with Cheryl and Diane, and those two girls took her home every other weekend. They switched off weekends to be with their families. During the week, the Clark School focused on oral language development, in which sign language was banned, and the students relied on lip reading and using informal hand gestures. At the end of her 7 years at Clark School, Bainey's parents took her home for good. It took her a while to get accustomed to the hearing world. At the age of 11, Bainey had the vocabulary of a kindergartner. She made it through middle and high school painfully, but learned tactics to be a participant of the hearing world. When she entered college, she experienced depression and loneliness in a world where there was little understanding of deafness. However, after a few years, she prevailed with the help of a persistent advisor and her loving family. Bainey relied on her brothers and parents a lot during these years, as making friends was a challenge for her. However, over the years, she did keep in close touch with Cheryl and Diane from the Clark School where she went when she turned 5. Cheryl and Diane also attended regular school after their time at Clark like Bainey did. Bainey visited them in the summers, but started to feel some discomfort as she was much more adapted to the hearing world than her friends Cheryl and Diane. She was very upset to learn that Cheryl had later joined the deaf community using only sign language, as Bainey had worked so hard to overcome her hardships in the hearing world. Diane had it both ways. She was in the hearing world but still had a circle of deaf friends, while Bainey was immersed only in the hearing world. 20 years later, there was a Clark School reunion, and Bainey was shocked to see that most of her old school friends were using official sign language. She discovered that most of Clark's students who had more severe hearing losses than her were not socially and academically content in the hearing world and found their place in the deaf community. This led Bainey to do some research about deafness. She learned only then that her own voice could never sound natural despite pronouncing some words perfectly. She discovered why her reading and writing levels were always lower than her hearing peers. Most importantly, Bainey learned that happiness was the most important thing for the deaf person, regardless of what type of communication or lifestyle he or she chose. This discovery encouraged Bainey to accept Cheryl's decision to join the deaf community and Diane's decision to stick with her signing friends. She also began to take sign language classes and joined a deaf organization. With a strong motivation to learn more about deafness, Bailey attended meetings to hear about options such as cued speech and ASL and English combined. Since today is more flexible than the 1960s when she first attended the Clark School, she learned to be more open-minded about viewpoints about deafness. Today, Bainey believes that happiness is extremely important for a hearing-impaired person. He or she should have his own choice of communication, and the lifestyle should be accepted. Now, Bainey, Cheryl, and Diane are still wonderful friends. They can talk, lip read, laugh, and be merry without feelings of conflicts from their past. So some quotes that I have 3. I'm going to give you a little background from them first. So the first one, Bainey describes the difference between the hearing and deaf worlds, as most of her peers that she grew up with were more deaf than she is. Or are more deaf than she is. She says, hard of hearing people are likely to take the most abuse from both the deaf community and the hearing world. The former shuns them, believing they are not really deaf, and the hearing world ignores them or expects too much of them, while it tends to be more sympathetic to those who are profoundly deaf. So this shows the effect that this divide had on her. This obviously affects deaf people's social life as they feel ostracized and ignored by both communities. It affects their communication because they struggle to communicate in the deaf community if they are not proficient in sign language, and they have trouble understanding speech in the hearing world. It affects academics because teachers or professors may expect too much from the hard of hearing person and not provide necessary resources for them to succeed. My second quote, so a little background again. Bainey describes her college experience, which was hard for her. She had some difficult years of depression and feelings of loneliness. So she says, "The truth is, I was often ashamed of my disability. I was embarrassed enough to avoid the 2 other deaf students on campus, trying to blend in with the majority." So this shows the struggle that many deaf people may have socially. They may feel embarrassed of their disability and avoid being in the spotlight for it. So Bainey avoided the only 2 other deaf students at her college. And it got me thinking, who knows what her college experience might have been like if she became friends with them. And last one, I just thought this was a super cool quote and that I should read it to you guys. So the book is titled All Eyes, and this quote describes why. It's actually a longer quote. I took about half of it that I feel like kind of encapsulates the main point. So she says, "Deaf people are all eyes. That's how I feel about myself. I don't know what would happen if I lost my sight. How on earth did Helen Keller get by?" So I feel like this quote shows the brevity of how difficult having a hearing loss is and how much individuals with hearing loss rely on visual cues. And it also shows how Bainey feels about her life as a deaf person. So she relies so much on her eyes in that she feels like deaf people are all eyes, so to say. So yeah, it was a really wonderful memoir. I think I'm gonna read it again. So thanks for listening.